Okay, Kathee, take it away.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everybody. Thought I'd wear this nice bright blue shirt just in honor of sunshine. My voice is a little bit cranky. Have videos again, and just a reminder about the videos. It's like doing your own VCR. Oh, that's very old-fashioned, isn't it? DVD. You're going to hit the play button, and so when I say push play now, you'll see the little triangle down at the lower left hand of the screen of the video, and then you're going to push it, and it's going to go ahead and play to the duration of that video clip. And I feel very excited today because we have a parent of one of our students who's on the video, and I'm happy that she could attend, and very grateful to all the parents and the professionals who allow us to use videos of the students and the children so that it becomes a teaching tool for all of us. And every time I see a video, again, I notice things that I didn't notice another time before. Or somebody else makes a comment and I go, yeah, I didn't notice that. Or you know a little bit more about that child than I do, and therefore you read her in a way that me, a stranger, doesn't. And that's great information. And that's really what we're looking for. So we're glad you're here. The outcomes for today are that we want to identify active learning strategies and adaptations that support the child within his or her family and school, and then also to identify communication strategies and adaptations that support the child within his or her family and school and program. So with that, I just want to do a quick review of the last time we met, and I'm curious if any of you were able to go back and look at students' files and notice what the cause of the child's disability is. Was it a congenital, prenatal, postnatal condition, and prematurity as a possibility? Were any of you able to do that? And if you did go back and start looking at that based on the handout that we gave about conditions and syndromes, would you please put a green check? Okay, great. Great. I think that's the important piece, is to sometimes to go back in, and for those of us who work with some of the older students, and by that I mean even 6- and 7-year-olds, sometimes we don't have the access to the medical records that are really important, and to ask those questions. Also, did you take the information about development of vision and hearing, and we had one about vision and one about hearing, and some of the behaviors we could expect to see, some of the actions the child would have in order to see what their vision was like or see what their hearing was like. And I'm talking about functional, how the child functions with his hearing or her vision, not the eye report from the doctor. I'm just talking about what kind of information we're able to do. And if you did take the time to do that, if you wouldn't mind sharing in the box, in the chat box, that would be great. One thing that happened to me this week, this past week, was I recently did see a child who had no vision assessment whatsoever. And she was 3 years old, and I still looked at her and I thought, there's something not happening with her vision that I'm not quite sure about. So I asked several questions of the family and the team about the child's likes and dislikes, and what happened is some things started to show up that suggested to me that there might be a cortical vision issue. And then when we were able to go back and look at the child's records, then under the conditions and syndromes, we saw several things that could point to the possibility of cortical vision impairment. And that was one of those things of being able to sit and think about it, not maybe the doctor and the diagnosis, but to look functionally at what the child's vision was doing. I noticed that when I was shaking the toy, the child responded and actually started to reach out for it. And then what happened was as soon as I stopped shaking the toy and I was maybe 12 inches away from their face, they stopped looking. And so I went, so does that mean the better vision, the best vision is closer to the child's eyes? Is it because they picked it up when I shook it with their peripheral vision? Those are all those things that I started asking myself, and it's a little bit like Sherlock Holmes. It's that mystery of finding out what's going on. Okay, I was just checking to see if anybody else had an opportunity to do that. Okay, now we're going to do a multiple choice, and what's going to happen is in the box that you were checking yes and no, Michaela's going to actually put up the opportunity to do multiple choice, and I'm just waiting for that. Leah just shared that we did the same thing with a student trying to determine, was that child responding to the light or to the sound? That's a great question, because so often we hear that it's a sound. Oh, the child hears that, and we later find out, no, it was, what he did is he picked it up out of the side of his eye. Okay, so up where you saw the green and red, the green check and the red X, there's now an opportunity to respond with an A, B, C, or D. And I'd like you to think about, we talked about the sensory channels, on how important the sensory channels are. So if you're trying to find that child's current strongest sensory channel, and it might be more than one, that's important because what? That the service providers to determine, for the service providers to determine what assessments are appropriate only. Is it for families and service providers to develop appropriate adaptations and strategies considering that child's unique needs? Is it knowing what specialists should be added to the child's learning team, or none of the above? So if you'd like to go ahead and click what you think the answer is, I think some people have already done that. We've got several B's. I'm just checking something. There. Okay. Great. So it looks like everybody got the B, which I was really glad to see, because it's not about how to determine what assessments are appropriate only, and it's also not knowing, do I now add somebody to the team without having the appropriate documentation or at least functional information. So that was great. Thank you all. And I saw some of you did it in the chat box, and that was great too. So, and this is just the last part of the review. When reading a child's file, what are some of the red flags that might appear to indicate a risk, that the child's at risk for a hearing and vision loss? And if you would just take a minute to type into the chat box and think about what we talked about, all the red flags last time. And feel free, if you need to look at your sheet, that's okay too. Multiple ear infections, multiple infections. Yeah, pick the ones that kind of maybe were ahas to you that you didn't think about. Prematurity is one. Congenital conditions, right. Over 4 days in the NICU, you know. Has that child been there a long time? Are there some things, I mean, most children don't stay in intensive care for no reason at all. Birth complications, family history, those are all great. So just wanted to kind of review in our minds as we go on and start talking about the strategies today. And not attending to the voice or to the activities that the child's doing. So we're going to talk about active learning strategies and adaptations. This is called the 6 C's, and these strategies assist children in becoming active learners. And I want to make sure that you think in terms of the children not as being learners, but active learners. How is it that you learn best when you are learning a new skill, a new task, a new hobby, a new recreation and leisure activity outside, skydiving, rock climbing, sewing, scrapbooking. You know, what is it that you really, what makes it that you learn it? Because you're active in it, not because somebody's just talking you through it. Doesn't mean you can't listen to somebody and learn something. It just means that you often need to experience it yourself. So with the 6 C's, and you should have gotten the PowerPoint presentation sent out last week along with additional handouts. The first one is connection, and sometimes I'll refer to connection as relationship. It can be bonding. There's not just one word for it, but and then there's channels of learning, and we talked about that a little bit. The sensory pieces, all those sensory channels, the child's lead and pace, concept development, consistent routines, communication and conversation development, nonverbal too. Do not keep thinking about conversations being something we simply talk and the child talks back to us, or even signs back to us. So with that, we're going to go into connection first, and it all starts here. For these children with multiple disabilities, whether they have a sensory loss or not, it is about a connection. You develop a relationship that is honest and predictable. So some people say, well, so what does honest look like for a child with multiple disabilities? You know, one who may be 8 months old, 3 days old, 3 years old, 5 years old, 12 years old. Doesn't matter. What does it look like, and what is honesty? And honesty in that relationship is making your emotion and your mood match your face, match your voice, and even match your body. So that if I'm extremely distressed about something, many of our students pick that up very quickly, especially when we are physically in contact with them. I may only have my arm next to them, but there's a tenseness in me that most of us don't recognize. And what happens is sometimes we're trying to put a happy face on something when in essence the rest of our body is not showing that. That's one of the honest things. Another honesty piece for this group of children is the idea that every time I'm going to do something that's uncomfortable for you, I am not going to sugarcoat it. I may do something to distract you, but I'm not going to sugarcoat it and pretend it's not going to happen, and then do it. And the example I'll give you is working with a child who was about 16 months old, and she needed to be she needed to be suctioned fairly frequently. And one of the things we did was simply to take the finger, the parents did, and did this, just snapped it slightly on the bottom of her foot as a way to let her know that we were actually going to go ahead and suction her. And then the deal about predictability is, do I stick the suction in the right side, I then go over, I come down, I come back over, and I'm up and I'm out. I don't sit there and just keep doing it, because the child can't predict how long is this going to go on. So you come up with a way that you can consistently do it. Now let's say that I take the suctioning out and I have to go back in and suction again. Then I do the same thing to her foot, and then I go in and suction the exact same way so that that's predictable. The family, of course, and I remember this as a mother, my gosh, I don't want to let her know it's going to happen. The reality of it was they called me up and said, after 2 days of them doing it, and they said it was so hard on them, but they did it. She said after 2 days, she said my daughter would open her mouth expecting it. And and that tells me a lot about that child's ability to learn, and also look at how reinforced the parents were for being so consistent and predictable. So honesty and predictability are very, very important. If a child wants to know if you're sad and maybe there's been a death in your family, then you admit that you're sad. You don't sit there and try to put a happy face on it. Doesn't mean you're mopey. But I'm thinking about Barbara Miles, who is one of the most amazing people I've ever heard talk. one of the things she would talk about is that one day she went into class and she was signing under this deafblind child's hands, and she was signing something, and he signed back to her, "Why are you sad?" He could feel the sadness in her hands. The sensitivity of our children to touch is amazing. We can't quite get it. Then there's about finding a pace of communication and interaction that works for the child. Not that works for us, but for them. And then child participation in interest-based activities, their likes. What do I learn about their likes? What do I need to know about their likes? And a trusting relationship must be present before the child can focus on learning. So if there's no trust, that child is worrying about what's going to happen to me next. He is not, or she is not, focused on what it is that I'm hoping they're going to learn, that I'm presenting to them. And then responsiveness to the child versus teaching skills. And I'm going to hit this in several places, so I'm going to say one thing now, and I'll add to it, and that is, how is it that you know someone is actually listening to you when you're talking to them? Think about, how do I know that they're truly listening to me? And I'd just like you to take a moment and type some things into the chat box, because this is a very important piece. Their response, eye contact. They respond facing me. They may stop the activity that they are doing. Great. They may reflect or repeat what you say. Body becomes quiet. They give feedback. There's body language involved. Great one. They may ask follow-up questions. Those are all great responses. That's how we know. So the question is, how do our children with multiple disabilities and may have a sensory loss also, how is it that they feel that you're responding to them? And a few things, I've thought about and written down is, I see some of you, I've seen some of you both in videos as well as when I visited a program or a home. I see people responding to what the child does. If the child babbles, I go ahead and repeat it. And one of you mentioned repeating. That idea that, are they looking at you? Well, for some of our students, looking at us is not going to look the same as a baby or toddler as it may for a child who has vision. So I look at, and one of you mentioned the body skills, like they're kind of listening in some way. How do I respond when we're playing with the toys? And I'm going to show a video in a little bit, and I'd like you to be thinking about that response. Was there time for response? Did I work the response in? Did I go at the child's pace, or did I go at my pace? Okay. So how does the child know that you're there and you want to connect with them? And a lot of us would say, oh, well, we go and we say their name and they look at us, and that's how they know we're connecting. And one of the things that I suggested is there a second sensory channel that is strong enough that I might want to go through besides just talking? For many of our children, talking is what benefits us, not necessarily them. And you'll see in some of the videotapes, and again, a quick reminder about the videos, and that is, I may say some things about things we've noticed. None of us are perfect. Last time you got to see me interacting with the student and my telling you all the things that I did not follow. It's not like we are perfect. We are always striving to do something, do a new technique, do a new strategy, and it's not going to be every single time. So if I say something, and I'm going to especially talk here to the parent who's been gracious enough to let us use her daughter as an example. It is not about a criticism. It is about something I think about, that I go, am I contributing to this child's understanding through that channel, or am I actually interfering with it? How do you identify yourself to the child, or greet, or leave her? Do you let her know that you're going to be going someplace and that you'll see in a few minutes so that she knows she can anticipate that you're coming back? So in the case of one family that I met, what the mother did is the mother always gave her daughter her bracelet. And her bracelet stayed with her daughter. She went and did something, whether it was cook dinner or whether it was just answer the doorbell. She came back, greeted her child again under her hand, and took her bracelet back. The child knew after a very short period of time of like, oh, she's coming back. Okay? When mom had to go to work, she would put the keys in the child's hand but take them back. And eventually the child understood. And then once again, it's that honesty of relationship. She cried. Well, so do our children with no disabilities cry when mom leaves at certain times and certain stages. What is the pace of your connection with the child? Your or his pace? And I see this often is, because young children are just so sweet and darling, we tend to want to touch them all the time. And I just recently saw a videotape, and the person is patting the child on his knees. And I asked the question whether or not that was some signal to the child, and the answer was no. And so here's someone talking to the child at the same time they're patting the knees. If the child's sensory channel is stronger in touch, what do you think happens to the auditory of my saying his name and talking further with him? Any thought there? Feel free to type in the chat window. Yeah, and just so I can see, that's a great one, Karen, about showing the child your ring. That's always there to associate me with the ring. Yeah, Jill, that's right. So if my stronger sensory channel is touch and you're talking to me, it may be that I can't manage all those at the same time. So what happens is I feel the touch. I don't know what the tapping on my legs means. So I'm now confused. So it's if I'm consistent, if all of us are consistent, the family as well as the visiting people who come into the home, or whether the child goes into a center or into a school, when we're consistent, the child doesn't have to put so much energy and fatigue himself with trying to figure out what does she want of me, what's she doing that for. There must be a quantity of connection as well as quality. So, for example, because I don't go in on even a monthly basis with children on a site visit, there's no need for me to come up with an identifier. I may still connect with the child, but in general, I work through the people who already have the connection with that child. And then, how do you respect the child's temperament? You know, is my temperament one that's pretty easy, I get along, anybody can pick me up, and it's fine, so it doesn't matter as much for me? But even then, I ask myself, if I were more consistent, would that child be able to then focus on the learning that we're hoping he or she is going to do? If the child has a difficult time dealing with changes, how do I respect that child's temperament? Do we even get more structured for that child so that he or she can actually be more involved and not so distressed because of all the changes? So we're going to watch 2 video clips, and I want you to think about some of the aspects of connection that we just discussed previously. And the first one is a little boy named Manny. And I want you to look for that whole thing about connection. What do you see in this short video clip about the connection between this father and son? And then the second one is actually some turn-taking between mom and her little girl. And so I'd like you to look at the same thing. What are some of the things that would suggest that they're doing something right about connecting with their child and that we can learn from and do? Okay, so this is where we sit there and look for the small arrow, white arrow, down at the bottom left-hand side of the screen, and then put your cursor on it and push play now.
Get ready for picture. Can you do that walking thing where he was dancing? Ready? Ready?
Okay, if you'll go ahead and push play now for the second video.
She's nodding and I'm nodding back.
Of this. Of that. Okay, take one bite. No! One bite of this. Take one. Take the new soup.
Okay, so would you go ahead and write in the chat window, just type some things that you're thinking about. What were some of those connections between the parent and the child that you saw? Yes, that was a great observation with dad and son head touching. And I think I watched that video for 3 times before I picked that up. Fun interaction, something that the child likes. And then we're going to get into the following the child's lead, but that's a perfect answer. Lots of responses. Father asked if Manny was ready, respecting his pace. Right, and getting him ready to anticipate it's going to happen next, that predictability. The physical play, that both of those children really responded to physical, and that's true for a lot of children who have no disabilities, that in the beginning, that physical movement touch piece is huge. Repeating the same activity, and we talked about that. That whole idea of just don't do something once. Lots of touching and waiting for the child, smiling to show the mother that she likes the activities. So mom got the positive feedback. So some of those we want to look at for those of you who are engaged with a child, with the family. It's not only about you coaching that family, but it's about when you're engaged with the child, are you following some of those? Or do we, and I'm going to speak about me, okay, and you can apply it to yourself if you want, and that is there is so much for us to think about that parents do and we see it, and we want to say, keep doing that no matter what activity you're doing. But how can I do that? How can I slow my pace down? How can I do something like that dance that Daddy and Manny did, or something similar to that, when I'm supposed to be teaching? And the question is, what am I supposed to be teaching? Okay? And that idea of I'm teaching, I think we get caught up in teaching skills instead of saying, how do I allow and how do I encourage this child to show me as much as he can know and does know, and how do I help tie that in to the next thing he needs to be doing, whether it's a new concept or a new skill or the finishing part of a skill, whatever that is. Right. That's a great comment, Leah, that some responses with the daughter were so small that if you weren't paying attention, you would have missed it. Mom didn't, but you would. And it's sometimes why I really recommend to people who are working with kids with other disabilities that they really want to videotape stuff, just short little clips, so you can see stuff you missed when you were engaged with the child. Do you think Mom sat down and wrote a lesson plan for that activity with her daughter? I don't think so. But what a wonderful interaction. Same thing with the dad. Oh, and Mom is saying, and her sisters loved being there and to see her smile too, because then Mom is coaching them in ways that they can engage positively with their sister. And you cannot, Lavana, I hope I said your name right, you cannot have those teachable moments unless you're tuned into the child and see when they are ready. And sometimes what happens is, and I'll probably say this again before we're done today, and that is, if somebody came in and watched me, they might think I'm doing nothing. And the reality of it is, if you are observing and tuning into the child to see when he or she is ready, then the reality is you are doing everything. But to somebody out there who doesn't understand that kind of observation that we need to do with this group of children, they're not going to get it. And so you may have to prepare them if they come in. I remember one paraeducator I worked with said, can you say that to my principal? Because when he comes in, he thinks I'm not doing anything. Now, this happened to be with an elementary age student, but it was the same problem. So what we did is in a meeting, and he came in, we started talking about how important it was to be watching the child and get ready for when they're ready, not to push it through. I'm not sure that principal totally got it, but at least it got said. That's a great comment. So this is question 1, and I'd like you to think about this, and if you want to share it in the chat window, that's great, but you do not need to send anything in to us answering this question. This is strictly has to be sent in when somebody is actually taking the recorded training. You're not taking the recorded training, you're taking the live training. So please think about what are some aspects of making a connection with a young child with multiple disabilities that are crucial for children who may have an additional sensory disability, a hearing loss, a vision loss, or both. And feel free to refer back to the PowerPoint previous to the videos too. Decrease the distractions in the room. Yeah, if Daddy and Manny had been dancing with 18 other parents and their children, it might not have been that same experience. Touch, eye contact, how you speak. You know, you heard Manny's dad talking in a lyrical voice, and that made a difference for Manny. And for some children who may have, quote, normal hearing, a more lyrical way of talking gets their attention. The cadence of your sign song voice. noise and lighting levels, waiting time, going at the child's pace. What sensory channel are you going to use? Those are all great answers. So this is a quick little commercial, and I'll do this quickly, and that is thinking about the physical active learning environment, and some of you already mentioned some things. Why do you want to look at that active learning environment? You want to look at it for safety. If a child is not safe in that environment and people are running all over the place, walking, there's stuff strewn everywhere and it's not consistently in the same place, then that becomes an environment that the child is afraid to explore possibly. The accessibility. What is accessible for that child in that room? Can she get to something? Can he get to something? Is it always in the same place, and is it something favorite of his? For memory purposes, does he remember where it is? Structure. How do I set the structure of that location up? And in homes, it's much harder, and as a professional, I try to look at the structure the family has and see how I can assist within that structure, not try to set a new structure up. The consistency, the communication, and then the independence. This is not about establishing a Toys R Us in every home or preschool room. So get that out of your mind. And for those of us who have been bag ladies, that's not what we want to encourage in general. We don't want to encourage you taking a whole bag of toys with you. But it's about using the environment in the home or in the preschool classroom that is already there, and how can that set up? And now I'm going to do a small disclaimer. I believe that 90% of the time, and yet for some children, especially who have sensory disabilities, I will take items, for example, that vibrate, that are the difference between shiny and dull, transparent, translucent, a flashlight. I'm going to take some things that are stringy, because maybe their hands can't grasp a ball, and maybe they have to grasp beads or things that are stringy like a mop head. So I'm going to take some things with me in case they're not available there, whether it's in the home or whether it's in a preschool classroom or whether it's in a kindergarten, first grade, doesn't matter. I'm going to take some of those and have those with me. So especially when I hear people say things like, well, he doesn't like very much. The only thing he really likes is blah, blah, blah. And for one of the students I worked with, the only thing she liked was cloth diapers. And so we had to start somewhere to figure out what else is it that if she gets repeated, consistent exposure, that we can learn whether or not this is something she might actually enjoy. So in general, I say no bag ladies allowed, and for those of us, a lot of us would stand up and say, yes, I have been a bag lady in the past, and so have I. But I really want to look at how can I use that environment in the home? How can I use the environment in this preschool classroom or the kindergarten or the first grade instead of coming up with creating a whole new environment? So that's my little advertisement. Okay, last week you saw these three things, and just a reminder that we're talking about the fact that there can be some kinds of things that we use both for assessment purposes as well as for strategies. What are the things for some of these children with multiple disabilities who may not be able to roll over or crawl to some area? Gosh, I could put a Velcro vest on them and put toys on it or items on it that that child can actually handle with the size of his or her hands. Or can I do something like the triangle board, which you saw last week sat up as a triangle shape, and you can hang different kinds of things from it for the child to explore while she might be sidelined on the floor. That may be a position that the physical therapist is thinking would be a good position. Or an activity board, which could also, for example, this one is see-through, and so it could be on a light area, like a light box. Excuse me. And I'm just going to briefly, at the bottom, you're going to see our website with a recorded training about active learning. If you go into those, there are 4 different learning webinars that are an hour and a half each. You can go listen to them. If you want to take them for clock hours, it talks about how to do that. But it talks about more than just these, why you use it, how you use it. It also actually talks also about the fact that it's about learning something by using these devices. So these devices are not the end. The idea is to use this device so the child can access learning and concept development. And here are just a few more things. One was a pegboard table that was fastened to a regular table, and so for kids that you're trying to get to stand up and move around, that they could stand up and move around the table and play with those items that are attached to the table. Or a texture board like the little boy in the bottom picture. There's some boards hanging and they can explore. And then the idea of, gosh, do I want to hang one of those texture boards or something similar in the window where there's more light? For some children, that would be way more interesting. And so I'll refer you again to the Ohio Deafblind website, and there's actually a product called Hold On, and you can download it with a variety of activities. But once again, I'm going to say to you, the activities have to be something that you found the child enjoys. Don't just look at these activities and think, oh, okay, I'll just make one just like this. It doesn't work that way. You really have to think about, what is it the child likes that I'm going to tie on that table or put on that board or hang from that hanger that's stuck in the window? Okay, and last time we talked about channels of learning, the use of sensory channels. And so we talked about it a little bit already today. I want to give you a chance to actually practice this a little bit. So for those of you who have your form with you, feel free to grab it and experiment with this next videotape that we're going to show. Use that handout, and as you're writing something that you see the child do, and remember we talked last time, is you don't write, the child looked up, blah, blah, blah. It's the child raised his head when the pom-pom was moving. We're not sure he looked up. It could have been, as somebody related earlier, it could have been the sound of that mylar pom-pom that raised his head up. It wasn't necessarily his vision. So keep that in mind. And then just write on each line something you notice. And it's okay if you miss something while you're writing it. It doesn't matter. This is just for practice purpose. And then when we're done watching the video, I'd like you to think about, gosh, was that more of a visual task? Do I think? Was it more of a T, a tactile touch? Was it more of an A, auditory, listening? Was it more of an olfactory, gustatory, a taste, smell thing? Or was it more of a proprioceptive, vestibular, which I would call in general movement thing? So with that, we're going to go ahead and look at the video as soon as it comes up. And remember, again, you're going to go ahead and look for the little triangle that is at the bottom, like you would see in on any video. And you're going to push it when I say it to do that. Okay, just a minute. We're almost there. All right, this is Andy Rose, and she's exploring toys. So think about what you might write. All right, push play now.
What she was thinking of. Really, no, I'm not interested. Been there, done that.
Right.
Moving
I
on.
have some really cool things right here.
Yeah, that's right. That's right, Andy Rose. You have that fun stuff.
So, Michael, when you work with her, do you work on one specific goal or task, or do you come and kind of join where she is?
Actually, I do her tours, and then they are very good about creating this space because she trusts them.
Which could be down here. Wait, not this. Yeah, perfect.
Does she know you? She must know.
Yeah, she does. She knows who I am when I come in the door and stuff. And I say Andy Rose. One thing, it wasn't Diane so much. We had another vision. Well, you might remember Jamie Bagot. Yeah, she was a vision. And one thing I always took from Jamie is that when she met someone, she said, you know, I think she located that way. I do too. But it's really obvious. She also gravitates towards that pocket of light.
The same way when visiting. She had observed that. Yeah. That was.
Yes.
Okay, so using that form that you received last week, I'd like you to just think about, if you looked at however many you wrote down, what would you say the strongest sensory channel is on this child based on this very short observation? I would never do this based on this, but I want you just to get some practice. So think about looking at those, the V for visual, T for tactile, A for auditory listening, OG for olfactory, gustatory, smell and taste, and PV, perceptive vestibular movement. If you had to guess at the strongest sensory channel, what do you think it is? One person said auditory, another one said auditory. Auditory first, tactile, and then visual. So this person is starting to look at, is there more than one? Auditory, tactile, auditory, but also movement. Possibly auditory. She enjoyed shaking auditory rings. At one point she picked up a ring that made a sound and that didn't make a sound and put it down. Auditory and receptive. I would guess auditory and sensory, feeling the vibrations. Auditory, she shook items and put down toys without sound. Proprioceptive. Okay, so now I just want you to imagine whatever answer you all came up with. I want you to think about the environment that she was in, and I want you to think about what you might change about that environment in order for her to get the maximum use of her strongest sensory channel. Think, reduce the extraneous conversations. Hang some of the toys. Provide toys with different sounds. Maybe a smaller room. Maybe the room was so large she couldn't get a sense of where she was in relationship to anything. Maybe a tiled floor, something that was harder. One person was tapping the floor that didn't seem to be mimicking her shaking. Right. So we didn't see the strategy of, gosh, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to follow her lead. Someone tried to get her to do something different by tapping on the metal bowl turned over. There's nothing wrong with that. Absolutely nothing. This is not a criticism. It's just things to be thinking about. How do I want to do this? Do I want to follow the child's lead? Maybe use a resonance board. And we talked about that in the last session, a little bit about resonance boards. A variety of tactile items. Add a wall to move off of the floor. So maybe something on the wall. Especially if I were wanting to help, if she was able to stand up, I might actually hang things from the wall, put a piece of pegboard up on the wall, bring the elastic through it using popsicle sticks that are nice and flat, and then hang things from the wall. That's a possibility. For Andy Rose to be working on the floor in a sitting position and sometimes a kind of a lying position, that is a different experience than standing up or sitting in a chair or sitting on some kind of a device, such as whether it's a box or whatever you decide to do, whether it's in a stander. For some children, the physical therapist has said, you know, we need to do things in standers. So what are we going to be doing when that child's in a stander? Right, breadcrumb, quote, of toys to encourage movement, to find something. Is it the movement that I would get from her, or would it be the sound that I would get her to move towards it? But that's that whole piece about what we're talking about, those channels of learning. And channels of learning can change over time. Doesn't mean the child's vision gets better or their hearing gets better or whatever it is. It just means that they by my using it, they may start to depend more on that channel and make sense of it and have it work out for them. So if this little girl has an auditory piece, and you all saw Andy Rose previously in the last session, well, what we knew is that she had a unilateral hearing loss. So when she does that shaking, she shakes it near the ear that hears. So that's another piece. Placing items on the side that is neglected to encourage her usage of both sides of her body. See, those are the things that you start to get from the different members of the team, that if I'm the only person who's out seeing the child, if that physical therapist says, look, I really think we need to do this, it may be that the physical therapist isn't going to be there, but I'm going to go ahead and institute some of those. But I'm going to know what things she likes that I can go ahead and do. I mean, it was very clear with that frog, the soft green frog. She touched that thing once and it was like, I'm not interested. It doesn't do anything for me. So that auditory piece is huge. Again, somebody could say, well, gosh, you're just playing on the floor with this kid, and, you know, by gosh, he needs to be learning something. And the answer is, you are learning something, so you can create the environment that he or she will learn in. Okay, so let's watch this video clip. Oops. Oh, I think I'm off on this one. Yep, we already did that one. Okay, question 2. Once again, a reminder, this has to be answered in email form only if you take the recorded webinar. It doesn't have to be answered today, but I would encourage you to find an answer. So we're going to go back up, and I know that Michaela's going to switch the check up above the word main room into a multiple choice, and there it is. So what physical, and this is not a right or wrong answer, I'm curious, which of those things that we looked at, a Velcro vest, we talked about earlier, a communication switch where you hit the switch and it says something, a triangle or a texture board that has all new items, or all of the above, what physical device or item might you, your own personal opinion, use when observing the child to complete the use of sensory channels form? What would give you the most information, do you think? Go ahead and pick. So I'm seeing all of the above, and I'm seeing a triangle or texture board. Once again, there is no right answer. I'm seeing a Velcro vest. Okay, and I'm seeing, yeah, okay. And the reason, one of the reasons I threw the communication switch in is that if the child's hitting the communication switch, whether she knows to hit it in the right places or he knows to hit it at the right times, the question is, how much am I going to observe what he's doing? So think in terms of that idea of where am I going to get the most information about how he would explore, especially if I had set up the things that I know he likes. or set up some things that I don't know if he likes, but I'm going to try. Okay, great. Then the child's lead and pace. We've talked a little bit about this, and I'm going to, you have to scrap your agenda in the beginning. And I know that's hard because you need to get through certain things so that I can check it off the IFSP or I can check it off the IEP for some children that are a little bit older. The idea of following the pace is so important, and it's how I find what the child likes, especially if I don't know very many things that he or she likes. And the Family Infant and Preschool Program, FIPP, F-I-P-P, which is a great place. They have a discovering interest and activities. How do you discover it? How do you be responsive? We were talking a little bit about that before. And there's a newborn interest and activity plan from 2007. And one of those things I looked at too, and I thought, you know, it's not just newborn. It would be for children older too. So there's some interesting checklists for those of you who would do better with a checklist. Gosh, how do I know what textures? How do I do all this? Okay, so we're going to go ahead and watch this video with two things in mind. Okay, this is about following the child's lead and pace, and that is what might be the adult's purpose in using the Mylar pom-pom, and if the child's lead is followed, could you make it look any different? I think it's going to be pretty obvious to you that it's not totally followed. So once again, let's go down to the left-hand corner where the triangle is and push play now.
Really?
Okay, so first of all, I would like you to tell me could you just jot down in the chat room what you think might have been the purpose for this person doing this activity with the child? Maybe working to see are there visual fields where he picks something up visually. Gaining attention or orientation. Tracking from side to side. Reaching behavior. To engage him while he was in the stander. An activity to do while you're doing something else that needs to be done, such as work a certain amount of time in the stander. Yeah. Reach and grasp. Okay, so now, how many of you, and Michaela, if you could switch back to the green check and the red X for me. Thanks. What I'd like you to do is, if you felt that the adult followed the child's lead and pace, would you put a green check? If you think the adult didn't, would you put a red X? Okay. So now here's the question. Most of you felt like the adult didn't. How many of you, and you don't need to answer this, but in your head, how many of you have done something like this with a child and you went, boy, I sure didn't follow the lead? I know I have. So here's the question. If the adult, how would this video look if the adult had followed the child's lead and pace? What would be different? And what I'd like you to do is, well, thanks, Jen. You're willing to admit to it, too. So go ahead and think about what would be different if that adult had followed the child's lead and pace. There might be less movement, right? Less movement and shaking of the mylar by the adult. There might have been more of a reaction and interest on the part of the child. And remember, we're talking about active learning strategies, not passive. Maybe the child would have been able to explore that pom-pom more with his hands. May have more reaction. The adult should have waited for the child to respond. Right. And do you think that adult read the child's sensory channels correctly? If you had to guess, would you say vision is one of his top sensory channels? Put an X if you think no, put a check if you think yes. Or write it in the window, whichever way you want to do. Yeah. Yeah. Vision is not his strongest sensory channel, but you could say, well, she was working on trying to get him to look up to see it, and that's okay. The question is, how do I, within an activity I already have a purpose for, how do I read that child so that it can become a learning opportunity for the child? Not a teaching opportunity for me, but a learning one for him. Try a different position. Maybe the child's struggling to maintain his posture in the stander and can't really manage using his vision at that moment. Maybe he needed to have both of his hands on the stander table in order to feel safe. And just for your information, that was his first day in a stander. And so that's just a little piece of information. Okay? All right, lots, and so you saw much less participation on his part because of that. Okay? So we'll go to the next C. Well, first of all, we'll do question 3. What is the hardest, and you already remember, I'm not going to keep saying this, but you don't need to email us any answers. What's the hardest part for most families and professionals when following the child's lead? Is it waiting for the child to respond and react? Is it letting the child set the pace? Is it not getting all the activities that you want to get done? Or all of the above? I see a bunch of D's. Yes. That sure is for me. Are you guys hearing somebody talking in the background? Yes? Oh, good. Okay, it just went off, I think. At least for mine it did. Okay, great. Concept development, and this is a training in itself, so I am just simply going to do a little bit of an overview on that also. And that's the idea of concept development. You take the time to let the child learn concepts, not just skills. It's routine-based early intervention. We set routines up at home. Even the game of turn-taking with the mom and her daughter, that was a routine-based early intervention. It's a routine they've got going. The same thing with Dad and Mammy. That's a routine they have going. building on activities, settings, and learning opportunities, not making my discipline the focus, meaning if I'm the OT, if I'm the PT, if I'm the SLP, if I'm the teacher, the reality is my discipline is there to support the child's learning. It is not there to say we need to make sure that we get all of these in exactly this way. It's how am I going to help that child to be in a position or to be in a way of learning more. And when I separate that out and I say I'm doing the PT over here and the OT over here and the SLP, the language over here, that's when you get something where that child cannot connect the dots to get the concepts and the skills. And unfortunately, that still happens now. So concept development. This is just a drawing done by a 2-year-old. And when the mother said to the little girl, said, "Oh, I like the hair." And she was very indignant and said, "That's not hair." And so she started to point to each one of the little things coming out from the center and said, "Oh, that's my baba, my bottle. That's my mama. That's my dirt, a dirt pile in the backyard that she loved to play on. That's my horsey. That's my dada. That's my baby Ern," which was her little sister named Erin. So it's that whole thing of I have to formulate and I have to help that child make the connections between what he already understands and start increasing so that he can learn more. But I have to help make the connection. And what we often do is we end up teaching skills to children, rolling over, standing, crawling, feeding themselves, or sitting and opening their mouth. It depends on the child and their disabilities. And we're so busy working on the skill, we forgot about the concepts. And so the example I'll give is one about toilet training. When people say, "Well, we can't seem to get her to toilet trained," my response is, "So she knows the difference between wet and dry, right?" "What?" I said, "Well, how would she be able to understand and communicate to you that she needs to change her diapers or her pants if she doesn't understand the difference between wet and dry?" And so that's just a very simple one, and all of us are somehow involved in changing diapers. And how many times when we're changing diapers do we let the child feel that it's wet and then quick wash their hand off with one of the wipes? How often do we talk about wet or dry? How do we do that? So that's just an example of the concept pieces. And we're going to watch this. And so what are the concepts that you think this little girl might be learning? Because some of the active learning devices that we looked at earlier, they are not the end. They're the means to the end. And the end is about learning concepts, learning to move within the environment, learning that things are different from each other and things are the same. So with that, here we go. Push play now.
Tear that thing? Sister, we're going to have to give you industrial strength. Go, baby, go.
Yeah.
Get this off so it doesn't dampen the resonance. Oh, no, it's true. Yeah.
Wow. Whoa, what's coming at me?
She has a lot of curiosity.
Yes, she does.
Yeah.
And she's going to do something.
Awesome.
Baby kicking.
She's that little grin on her face.
So much information.
She's loving it.
Put the beans
She's
on
never
her
been
foot.
on a hard surface at all.
Yeah, I mean, how many times would we lay our children on top of plywood?
We wouldn't.
Yeah.
Okay, I wasn't able to see it. I've seen it before. I saw somebody else said they had a black screen. You can always look at this recording in a couple days and pick up the videos that you may have missed. So this is Brielle, and you saw her earlier with playing turn-taking with her mom. And so one of the things I'd like you to think about is in that quote, adapted little room or space for active learning, whatever you want to call it, on a resonance board, and you heard them talking about the fact that she had never been on a hard surface before like that, what are some of the concepts that you think Brielle may have been exposed to learn? The feel and sound of the board, because that board there's going to be a certain amount of vibration in that board as she moves. That legs, she can make noise with her legs. The cause and effect. Hitting the board produced noise. And then think about the items that she was exploring, although she was so into, with it being her first time, she was so into the movement and her legs doing something in the movement. There were things hanging, things that were soft, things that made sound, things that were stringy. And hitting the object, some produced noise and some she seemed to avoid. And it may be she had her first contact with it, it was so different from anything she had touched before that it was like, uh-oh. Or it was in this space for active learning and she's used to it being something that her sister holds up or her mom holds up or her dad. So that's one of the things you want to look at when you're putting together items that are going to go with this. You really want to think about, what do I want to hang up? What do I want to expose her to? Do I want to have two things that are similar? If she only likes soft things, do I want to hang something that's mostly soft with something that's maybe metal hanging from it so it's cold and hard so she starts to get exposed to other things? So name 2 skills and concepts you develop with young children, however it is, whatever area you're working in. And what are some of the concepts, and do you keep those in mind when you are working on the skill, or do we forget that part? So, object permanence and cause and effect. So think in terms of, what is it already within the environment and within that child's scope of knowing that I'm going to do cause and effect. It's not cause and effect in some little functional curriculum or some curriculum somebody gave you for development. It is, what am I going to use for the cause and effect? What would make sense to this child? What does she already have experience with that I can slowly grow more experience, but I'm going to start where she is? The idea of in and out. Something's in, something's out. I'm in, I'm out. Or in and on. So you want to always be thinking about those things when you're talking cause and effect and object permanence and those kinds of, quote, skills and concepts. What is it you're going to use? And what we do is we depend on something we learned with some other child, and it has nothing to do with this child's likes and dislikes. And so we do something they hate. And then we say, see, the child doesn't understand cause and effect. And then I show them a video like the issue of with Brielle and her mother, and I go, yeah, she's got cause and effect. Turn-taking. I can't tell you how many IEPs I see turn-taking on, and in reality, the child already knows turn-taking. They just don't know how to do turn-taking playing the game fish. And everything I'm saying to you, I've done wrong. Okay, so this is not me telling you how to do it because I know everything. It's because I've done it wrong. And think about what is it I want that child to learn? And then what do I use? Which likes and dislikes? And then what routines can I create? We talk about a consistent routine, but what does that really mean? So there are required elements for something to truly be a routine. There's a clear signal to the child. that the activity is starting. Ooh, let's play patty cake. And I put my hands under the babies, or I put them on their arm, or wherever I pat, and I say, let's play patty cake. And that becomes the touch signal or cue that we're going to play patty cake. The beginning. Then the steps occur in the same sequence. I don't change patty cake around. Each step is done the same way each time, the same materials, even the same person for a while. And even it could be the same place. That patty cake only happens when I'm in my bed when we read at night and before I go to bed. That might be the only time we play patty cake in the beginning. And then we slowly transfer it into other places with other people. Each step is done the same way each time. Assistance is given in the same way, always looking to see where can my assistance be lessened. And that means I have to take a beat of a few seconds, maybe 5, before I start the next thing in, and I slowly wait to see if they'll start to move their hands because they know the next part is rolling or whatever the next part of patty cake is. See, if I don't wait a little bit, I can't figure out what they already learned. I'm just assuming I have to do it and do it and do it and do it. And I don't. I'm amazed at how quickly some of those activities become that the child's leading me instead of me leading them. The pacing of learning is maintained until the activity is finished. No side conversations, no going to get something you forgot, or spontaneously adding in new or different steps because you thought it might be fun. That won't happen the next time that the activity's done, okay, unless you're assessing something. Then it has some switches so you can look. And a clear signal that the activity is finished. Do I go in under his or her hands and do we're finished? Or do I say, all done? What words do we use? Do I always use the same words? Maybe for Andy Rose, whose auditory is so strong, I want to make sure I use all the exact same words, because that may give her a trigger to be able to comprehend some spoken language. So this is a family's routine that was set up at home. So let's look at the elements that we just discussed, and you can refer back to those. Okay. Okay. So go ahead and press play now.
When he goes to sleep, I kind of tells him that it's time to go to bed, and we tell him when it's time to change his diaper and whatnot. But he likes to play in bed. It's really the biggest thing. Wanna lie down? Wanna lie down? And we have a little system. We try to do things the same so he knows what's happening. It's covered first, and then we squeeze the ball. You want your ball? Night night. Go night night. What is that? Night night. Night night.
Okay, so what did you see? And already a couple people were able to answer. Mom's putting an infant. Oh, I see, Katie, you're describing it. So what are the things that you saw that were elements of that routine? What did Mom say that goes along with what we were just talking about with what a routine needs to be? There were verbal cues, there were pulling the cover up, the ball in the hand, the kiss before leaving. So she was doing them the same way. She said, we try to do everything the same way so he knows what's going to happen. That's exactly right. Tells him ahead of time. Also, when she was squeezing the ball, she didn't put the ball right down to his hand. She squeezed the ball, and he brought his hand up. That's that active learning piece. Little teeny tiny things. They're small steps, but they're crucial. Okay. So question 5, and I'm not gonna ask you to answer this, but you can think about it. What and or how would you add to the previous nap time routine to meet the qualifications of the routine? Because we didn't see the whole thing, but there may have been a couple things missing. One question was, how did she start it? How did she start the activity? Did she do it in just her words? And were those consistent words? Okay, communication and conversation development, nonverbal. Discover and enjoy the amazing ways we can communicate without words, never losing sight of the goal of language. So, there's communication and there's conversation. Conversation is a part of communication, but there are communications that we do with children and with each other that are not true conversations. There's not the back and forth turn-taking that we think of when we think of a conversation with our friend who maybe saw the movie Avengers on the weekend. So that's one thing you want to think about is how many conversations do I have? And so Brielle, in the turn-taking, that was a conversation. There was a conversation between Manny and his dad. Okay, did you see any other conversations that some people might not label as conversations in any of the other video clips? Not really. We're going to see some, but not really. And then I like to think about ways of communicating the receptive part of how is it that I know Manny understands me, or Brielle. How is it that I understand Brielle or Manny? And they may be different answers. And this, we happen to just name the child John as an example. When are we reading the child's behaviors as communication, and when is the child finally actively communicating in a predictable way? There is a difference, and the communication matrix is one I would really recommend you use that tool. And once again, the communication thing could take days of training. So we're just hitting it to say this is what is one of the bottom lines for this group of children: movement and communication. And what we know from research is the more movement there is, I don't care if it's just their little finger that they can use, the more that little finger moves, the more communication will develop. And I'm going to separate communication from language. I'm talking about communication, the things we've already talked about, the facial expressions, the body movement, the stopping and stilling because somebody called my name. I'm talking about all those little things. The fact that I move and hit something constantly, and that's a communication. Or I push it away because I don't like it. Or I kick it away. Or I scream because I don't like it. All those different ways. So here are 2 video clips, and we're like 1 minute away. And for those of you who would like to stay on and see those, you can. What I am going to do, though, is just briefly jump over and just think about what has to be in place for conversation to truly happen with the child. And this is Sam Morgan, who works with the Deafblind Project in New York, says, we live in an increasingly rapid and technologically focused world that does not make room for those who need hands-on human relationships. I focus much of my efforts on communication and interaction. He believes that for children, the biggest changes come about when the people who interact with them slow down, are deliberate, and are emotionally open to a child and what the child is trying to express or do. And so question 6, think about activities that could lead or already are nonverbal conversations with the child, and remember their likes and dislikes. Who wants to talk about what they don't like? And if you've used all this information that we've shared in this session consistently and meaningfully to the child, what would change in the child's actions? Because that's the important part, is if you did all these strategies, what would you expect to see different in the child? And we do have an evaluation, and I would appreciate you taking that because we take them seriously. And there are resources again, video topics I want to remind you about, and I want to remind, Katie typed it earlier, and it's also on your last PowerPoint, and that is our website, the WSDSonline.org, now has video clips not just for kids with combined vision and hearing loss, but for birth to 3, infant and toddlers with vision impairment. And many of those videos will relate to things and techniques that you may want to use and strategies that have very important things. The more you observe and spend time watching children, the better you get at knowing what to do next with that child. Sorry. I apologize. Recorded trainings. And then also know that for those of you who are working with young children, as well as children up to the age of 21, Katie, could you go ahead and just say this last one for me? I just lost my voice.
Sure. So this is, sorry, I was typing something else in the chat box. The purpose of Washington Sensory Disability Services is to help families and service providers by supporting the developmental and learning needs of children aged birth to 21 who are deaf, hard of hearing, blind, visually impaired, or deafblind, which also is called combined vision and hearing loss. If you want more information, go to our website. And just also, we're a state needs project funded through the Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction. Thanks so much for joining us today. And Kathee, do you want to just say goodbye?
Yeah, thanks. And I consider it an honor to work with all of you, because I see by your answers you are really thoughtful about what it is that you're seeing with the children, and that tells me that you're using that in your lives, whether you're a parent or whether you're a professional with this group of young children. And it's been an honor to be with all of you, and hope you have a great rest of the day, and take care, guys. Bye.